And please share what you're hoping to gain in the chat box. In the Military Families Learning Network, we do use technologies such as this, not necessarily this platform, but technologies such as this to reach our audiences across the world. And because we have sometimes upwards of 100 participants, we don't always have their audio open. So we use the chat a lot in our webinars.
We've started using the GoToMeeting side of things for our team meetings, and obviously our branch's executive director is using webinars once a month to talk to staff and tell us all the views.
Mm-hmm. Wonderful. All right, I'm seeing it's in the morning most places, and you are looking for some general ideas on how to use webinars and keep people engaged.
Yes, that's correct.
Wonderful. Well, let me go ahead and start my presentation. Please continue to chat in the chat pod, because you have ideas on what works for your clientele that might be better if you learn from each other, and you might spark conversations amongst each other. My goal when I do online education is to keep the participants so busy with what we're doing, and truthfully, so off kilter, because I might call on them. I do use a lot of names, and I'll actually call on people. And so I want them to be a little unsure that they might be called on and have to respond, so that they're less likely to abandon and go and check email. Can you relate to that? We don't want to lose people to their email, because then we've lost them. So let me go ahead and open up my PowerPoint so that we can begin the presentation. And I want to begin by asking you to share what you have seen in webinars in the past. I'm sure that what you have done has been amazing and you've had really good success. But what have you seen that doesn't work in webinars in the past? Share in text chat what you've seen that hasn't worked in webinars. What have you seen done poorly in webinars? I'll start with my first post to show you what I've seen in webinars that doesn't work. When people read from their slides? Absolutely. Oh yeah, getting flustered when the technology gets wonky, because it does. It just does. And I've seen that as well. And what I've seen people do is say, oops, it's not working. Oops, it's stuck. And then it makes gives the participants a bad flavor in their mouth and a bad expectation. I've been in webinars, I've led webinars where I've actually gotten kicked off and then quickly jumped back into the webinar and continued speaking, and the participants didn't even notice. And I believe strongly that as a presenter, if you don't call attention to a technology glitch, oftentimes your participants won't either. Much like if you're doing a face-to-face training, a speaker can lose credibility if you stand up and apologize before you start talking. Don't apologize with the technology, just move on. That's a really good point. Speaker just talking to their computer? Yeah, absolutely. Not using intonation. So as I go through these different things, think about as we articulate the things that are bad, think about how you can note down how you cannot do that, what you can do that's the opposite, so that you can walk away with 3 or 4 things you can try the next time you lead a webinar. So not getting flustered, using people's names, not letting people see up your nose. That's a really important one. But using passion, using energy when you speak. I sometimes coach people to stand up. Maybe not if you have the camera on you, but certainly if you're just using a verbal type of interaction, stand up, move your arms around, gesture, get energy when you're speaking, because people can't always see the energy in you. So you've got to muster up that energy to make people want to listen. What else have you seen that's not so great in a webinar? Can y'all see up my nose? I hope not. No questions. Almost to where it's a canned presentation, almost to where you could just go to YouTube and watch a video. Yeah. And the reality is we as adults have valuable ideas and experience that we can share. When the speaker is noticing other things and people around them, sure. If their cell phone rings, if somebody's at their door, if they have background noise, yeah, all those things are distracting. Wonderful ideas. So let's move forward from there then. And let's say, what have you seen that is good? For those of y'all who have seen webinars before, what have you seen that is good? A poll at the start to get people's juices flowing, to get them to think about the content? Yeah, absolutely. The interactive chat, good engagement, polling or questions? Sure. A survey through the webinar? Have you ever seen any pre-work? Any assignment or reading or video that participants would watch before they got to the webinar? Because then theoretically, if they had done it, they already were kind of at a similar knowledge level and perhaps could dive right into the material. So that can be an idea as well. Yeah, and some people have done that. Do you notice as I'm asking you questions, I'm waiting for your answer? And there's some silence there. And when you're the one leading the webinar and you don't have the feedback on the other end, you can't see people connecting with you, that silence feels like it takes forever. So if you don't walk away with anything else from today, walk away with this. When you ask a question and you're inviting interaction, you need to wait for people to answer. You need to wait longer than you're comfortable with. You need to not answer your own question, because if you do, your participants will stop trying to answer. And Alice is saying it might be difficult to get people on board. Alice, are you referring to watching the video beforehand? Yeah, unmute Alice, you could tell us. Yeah, and you're right. Sometimes any other work involved is tricky. And some of the platforms that we use, and yes, Alice, you're welcome to unmute and talk, but some of the platforms that we use also allow us to have a video link within the webinar. And so we could say, at this point, we could say, okay, everybody click this link, go watch this video, and then we're going to come back. And then I would be quiet for 5 minutes or 4 minutes or however long the video is. And then we come back and discuss it. So you can build it into the webinar if you don't think they'll do it beforehand.
There we go. Now that I've remembered to unmute myself.
Sure.
Yeah, no, I find that really interesting, particularly having pre-reading or something. It does make sure that everyone's on the same page. But at the same time, with some groups of people, they might sort of, I think a lot of people have been trained to see webinars as, oh, I'll get my half hour of information and I don't have to do anything else. And so by asking them to read something or look at another video or go to a different website, it's a bit more engagement than some are currently used to. So I really like the idea, but it's just implementing it.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. That's a really good point. And I think that if people get used to the different way of doing things, if they knew that you were going to ask them something, for example, watch this video or read this publication and then be prepared to share your insight on it. And if you held their, if you held them to that and they knew that they were going to have to share either in text chat or verbally what they thought about that, then perhaps they would at least skim it in the 2 minutes before they started the webinar.
Yeah, sounds good.
And yes, my presentation style is that I ask questions throughout and I integrate the chat comments into what I'm saying, because then it's a conversation. It's the best that I can get to all of us being in the same room, because truly you have very valuable information to share. I'm not the only one who has, it's silly to think as adults that the people that are in your audience don't have valuable insight to share. And so, yes, I ask questions all the way through, invite participation. And as people see that it's a safe place and they see that their questions are incorporated and there is a semblance of a discussion, then I think they warm to that idea. And again, there are some people that you can't forced to participate, and there's only so much you can do with that. But these are some of the things that I've seen in good webinars, and I appreciate your input as well. But please, as we continue to go forward in this presentation, please continue to share, because like I said, y'all have very good insight that perhaps I wouldn't have thought of, and I value that, and thank you for participating. But I'm going to share what I know, the little bit that I know about the secret, which is not a secret, to really good webinars. And the first one is you got to plan it, right? We talked about the technology failing, and you have to plan it beforehand, because what are you going to do if it does? What's your contingency plan? Think before you leap. And yes, this is a picture of me jumping out of an airplane. My husband got that gift for me for Christmas last year, and it was very fun. But sometimes doing things new, like doing a webinar, it feels like that. It feels scary, like jumping out of an airplane. But there are ways to make it safer and make it more applicable and make it more apt to be successful. And some of those things are planning. And what do y'all do when you're preparing something to be delivered via technology? What are the ways that you plan beforehand and plan for contingencies and plan for engagement strategies? And I'm honestly interested. What are some of the things that you've run up against, and what have you tried that maybe works or want to try? I work a lot with academic faculty, and they are used to standing up in front of people and talking. And because they are experts in their field, they can tap dance, they can wing it, they can make stuff up on the fly, and they don't have to be super prepared. Can you relate to that at all? Do you ever work with subject matter specialists that are like that? Yep. Yeah, and so getting those people to do webinars, those are the kind of people who just want to talk because they can. But what if their mic quits working? What if their PowerPoint fails? Then do they still know what to say? Or if they don't have their notes? Yeah, practice running the seminar beforehand. So the presenter is comfortable, the slide works, the sound works, the video works, and then make sure on the day of the webinar that they're using the exact same machine and the exact same mic and the exact same headset. And that takes extra time for those of us who are facilitating that and teaching the presenters how to do it. But my hope is once we've done it 2 or 3 or 4 times, then they get comfortable with it. Maybe they can help their colleagues, or maybe their colleagues can look at them and say, well, if he can do it, I can do it. Trial runs, absolutely. Oh, thank you for bringing up the detailed PowerPoint snafu, because I'm going to talk about that a little. And you're right, Gemma, there are some people who can speak off the cuff easily, and they are good. It's interesting though, some people that I've found, if they like things to be very structured, then this kind of environment where you don't know what kind of questions are going to come up and you're having to talk and field the chat and do all these things at once, sometimes it makes people who are very linear very uncomfortable. And that maybe that's why it's good to have 2 of you. You know, the question about is it good for people to ask questions at any time or have set questions really depends on what the presenter is comfortable with, in my experience. I like for people to be able to ask questions, because if I'm on the participant side, I don't want to have to wait. I have my question now that I want to ask. So I'm not sure what that says about my personality, but I imagine there are some people who like that as well. So my preference is to ask questions at any time, but some presenters are not comfortable with that. And for them, we have intermittent Q&A time, but we really try to do it every 3 or 4 slides. And yeah, scientists would be linear, right? It makes them uncomfortable because they can't, they're uncomfortable with the multitasking. And I think if maybe we start them out with a Q&A every 3 or 4 slides, baby steps, right? Let's try this. It's not so scary. You don't have to interrupt. We've also, in the military families, had people that are in charge of the chat. And so in this case, I would have an assistant who would be watching the chat. And that person would say, hey, Jennifer, I see a question in chat, and they would read it to me. And that way I wouldn't have to go back and forth if I wasn't comfortable with that. Great points. And then we talked a little bit about pre-learning opportunities. If you can get your participants to do it, things about a pre-event question, something to prime the pump, something to get them thinking. When they're just joining the webinar, if they get there early, you can also have a link there in the beginning, depending on what platform you're using, that they could go and read some additional material if they had a few minutes early. You could also do a promotional video as the event was getting started to get people excited about it. And I don't always have the presenter visible. It depends on, well, it depends on a lot of things. Mostly it depends on my internet connection and on the internet connection of the participants, because we found that sometimes the video can make the audio weird. Has the audio been okay so far in our presentation today? Because if it hasn't, I should turn off my video. Okay, good. When I design online courses, and I do a couple different things in my job. One of the things I do is I design synchronous and asynchronous online courses. And some of those include live and recorded education such as this. And in those courses, I have to say that I don't think when you have a bandwidth issue that the talking head is worth the bandwidth. You don't need to see my face. It might be more important for you to see my PowerPoint. I try really hard to make my voice engaging, and so I don't think the talking head is typically worth the bandwidth. Maybe just at the start, absolutely. Yeah, and some people are scared of, they're self-conscious about having their face shown. But you're right, Julie. Having that at the beginning gives y'all a picture of my face to connect back to my voice as you hear me. And that's absolutely right. I've done it actually as an intro and as an outro at the end as well. So hello, I'm Jennifer. Welcome for joining me. And then I'll go to my presentation, and then I'll close and come back again, just kind of to close the loop. Webinar audience with an audience in the room. That's interesting. Now, when you're doing that, do you have a camera pointed at the audience in the room as well, or just at the speaker? I'd be interested to hear about that. But the other thing, and especially those of y'all who are dealing, no camera, awesome. Those of y'all who are dealing with people like engineers, I know that you never have too much content on your PowerPoint, right? Your PowerPoint slides are always very clean and succinct. Yeah. Oh my gosh. It's a fight I've been fighting for 2 decades. Is less on the slide means more retention. If we ask people to remember 20 things, they're going to walk away with nothing. If we ask them to remember 3 and we reiterate those 3, they'll get it. So when we deal with engineers, my recommendation is go with the most crucial points on your PowerPoint and what you're saying, and then provide links to that supplemental information that you, as a subject matter expert, think is critical, but really isn't. Really, the participants really don't want it. But in order to make you feel better, we'll go ahead and include it, but include it as supplement. Do you think that would fly with some of the people that you're working with? Do you think that they would be okay with you taking some of the content and putting it in a downloadable PDF instead of putting it all on the screen? And if not, what are some ways that you deal with? What are some ways that you try to get people to have less content on their screen? And you can unmute and talk. Feel free. Those of y'all who'd rather talk than type, go ahead and unmute and share. Oh, peer review is good. PDF links, wonderful ideas. Yeah.
Alice here.
Go ahead, Alice.
Cool. I've seen someone who basically took a diagram or a couple of points from a much larger document, like a couple of 100 pages, and just pulled out, the key points from it. And then said, if anyone wants to read, more detail into this, you can either read a chapter or you can read the whole thing if you really feel that way inclined. Mm-hmm. And that's actually come across really well. Like he's pulled enough information out for the webinar, but at the same time given people the option to go and see some more. That said, he's a very experienced sort of extension expert who knows what he's doing. So I've also seen some terrible ones.
Good. Thank you for sharing. My challenge with the subject matter experts that I work with is they have a hard time believing that anything is not crucial. And so for them, gosh, I try to pare it down very, very minimally, and they want it all to be included. And we try to meet somewhere in the middle because they believe, for example, I'm working on a course on septic. And do you know what septic is? Is that a term that's used everywhere? It's basically, okay, good. It's a very exciting course, as you can imagine. And it's for homeowners. And so for homeowners, I believe that what they want to know is it broken? And how do I fix it if it is broken? Or how do I keep it from breaking? And take care, Julie. And these individuals wanted to start with the history of waste in America. And I wanted to pull my hair out because as a homeowner, I would just skip all of that and go to the, is it broken? How do I fix it? Or how do I keep it from breaking? And I try to tell my subject matter experts, I try to ask them, have you searched Google? Have you searched YouTube for help in doing anything in your home, in your yard? And if so, why did you do that? And how long was the video? To get them to realize we're not dealing, when we're doing outreach education, we're not dealing with academicians. We're dealing with regular people, and they don't want to know the history, the dissertation of septic. So some of the things, that I've done with my subject matter experts is had to take their PowerPoints and edit them down. And sometimes they're okay with that, and sometimes they're not. But less images are more impactful because people can focus. Sometimes people are guilty of using images for decoration, and images should really be used maybe for a full page image on your screen. I think that can be really impactful, or for illustrative purposes, but not for decoration, not in a cutesy kind of format, which I've seen people use. And oftentimes people don't like white space, but the research shows us that white space allows people to focus. It allows them to breathe. It allows them to focus and to highlight the things that are the most important thing to keep in mind. So I also, as often as I can, will go through and make just white backgrounds on the PowerPoints. I brought this up a little bit, and I think it's crucial that when people are doing webinars, particularly when you can't see their face, that there's a lot of energy in their voice. And I do coach people to stand up, to get even a wireless mic, or to get a microphone, a headset with a pretty long cord, and stand and gesture and bring that energy from their body into their voice. Because people can tell, people can feel it, and you actually need a little more energy in a virtual environment than you would in a physical environment. And keep your participants engaged. And this is where you can precede the presentation, ask open-ended questions, all things that you know how to do and we've talked about. See if we can get this to play. Can you see this video playing? Okay, this is, there's nothing earth-shaking about this, but this presenter, all she had was text chat, but she was very good at pulling in what the participants were saying and having a conversation with the participants. And look at that amount of conversation that's going on. And this is nothing fancy. This is not Flash. This is not fancy graphics. But she's incorporating what her participants are saying. Into the conversation. And see her white background? Simple. And I'll go ahead, since some of you can't hear the sound, but the presenter does a really good job in here of bringing forth her participants in the chat and interacting with them verbally. And by incorporating people's names, asking them questions, following up on what they're commenting, that keeps them engaged and keeps them involved in the conversation, which is what I try to get my webinars to be, is a conversation. And then if you can, at the end, try to encourage your participants to continue to discuss that topic on a blog, in a email post, in a Facebook group. Assign a task for them to share at the end. Do something to encourage them to practice what they've learned, incorporate what they have heard about, because then it will get internalized. Then you'll see behavior change based on the things that they learned. Are there any things that you have tried after as something to continue the education after the webinar? Or is there anything that you would like to try that might work with your clientele? Again, if you're not a typist and you'd rather speak, go ahead and unmute and speak. The chat function. And you can, in most webinar platforms, save the chat out of it. So you could follow up, you could distribute the chat after the fact if you wanted to. And the surveys post-event are very effective. And yeah, it is hard to get them to complete it afterwards. Some of the links, sometimes there can be an immediate link at the end of the webinar, but that doesn't necessarily guarantee post-event follow-up. Potentially, you could email everyone after the event and ask them what they had tried and what had worked. But I encourage you to try some of these things. Try to think about how you can. And chat does seem more comfortable. Some people would much rather type than talk. That is absolutely true. Oh, that's a good tip. Go to webinars, take the learner straight into the survey. About a 60% response rate. That's really good to know. Well, as we try to get a handle on all of this and pull it all together, here are some things to consider doing. First of all, make sure that you've done that pre-work and make sure that you have an overall goal for the webinar. What is your point? What are you trying to convey? What do you want people to walk away with? And then from that, what you want them to walk away with are 3 key takeaways. And our key takeaways here are make sure you plan your webinar. Make sure you've incorporated some audience participation, and make sure that you have some pre and post. And Allison's asking, how does discussion and chat work if you have a group on one connection? Alice, it's a little harder because if you have 5 people at one connection, then you don't know which of the 5 are asking the question. Although you can say, you can still answer the question and you can still invite them, but it does get a little more complicated. If there's one person typing, they can say, Sarah wants to know, and then type the question in, and then you know that it came from Sarah. It can be effective. The one thing that I found that can be challenging if you have a group on one connection is there can be a side conversation that they're having that doesn't get shared in the webinar. Now that can be good and bad. If it's valuable and relevant, there can be still some good learning that happens amongst that smaller group, and it doesn't necessarily have to be shared, but it can also go off on a tangent and you wouldn't know it, and there could be some good information that doesn't come back. So I would say that it's less effective, but Alice, you work with what you've got, and if that's the way that you can get people to participate, then start there. Because some people maybe don't have the skills or the inclination to get logged in on their own.
Yeah, just jumping in there. I was going to keep typing, but I'm on an iPad and it's tricky. I was just thinking, if you had a really structured system where, say, at the end of, when you're talking at the end of a slide, you say, all right, now, if you've got a series of groups all on their sort of respective computers and you say, talk to the people in your group for 2 minutes, talk about what are the key points, and if you have any questions, this is now the time to put them in. Is that perhaps a better way to deal with that situation?
I would think so. And you know what else might be fun in those type of building on your idea is, okay, go in your small group and discuss this and come back with one of these concepts that your group believes is the most important, and be ready to share why.
Yes.
Sometimes when you just say, are there any questions, you don't get any answers. But that's one of the things that's interesting. If you phrase it differently and say, what else are you interested in? Or what do you have questions about? For some reason, at least here in the States, phrasing it like that invites participation versus, do you have any questions, does not invite as much participation. Does that make sense? And do you think that works in Australia as well?
Yeah, I think a lot of people find if you say, any questions, or do you have any questions at the end, they assume that's the end of the webinar. So it's all right, okay, time to click log off. They don't really use it as a chance to ask questions that much. So yeah, phrasing it differently does make a big difference.
Yeah, thank you for bringing that up. Thank you for sharing. The other thing that I typically do, because I do like to make sure that my participants are still out there and we're still engaged in a conversation, is I will ask you, and I will do that. And I won't continue to read what's on the screen because that's another one of my pet peeves, but you can see the best practices here and the things that we've talked about. But I'd like for you to share, based on what we've talked about today. I believe it's morning in most places. So what we've talked about this morning, what are 2 concepts? Well, let's go with 3. What are 3 concepts? What are your key takeaways? What will you walk away with from this presentation, and what will you try? What has spoken to you during our conversation today, and what will you try with regard to webinars? More silences, less structure. Yeah, and just to let you know, I just counted in my head to 60 while I was waiting for someone to type. And so it's very long and it's very uncomfortable. Oh, you have some really good ideas. It does take time to type. Show passion to be more aware, give good amounts of time, use white space, silence is okay. People need time to think when we're talking about topics like this, especially if you only use 2 fingers. Yeah. And let them use your microphone when they can. Like I said, oftentimes when we don't, it's because we have 100 people. And we do have the problem with feedback. If people have the sound coming out of their speakers and their microphone on, then when I'm speaking, I would hear myself in their microphone. And so that gets really annoying. And so we tend to mute them. But that doesn't mean that I don't want to hear from you. It just means that I don't want to hear myself through your speakers. More engagement, lots of questions. And some of this for our presenters is scary, right? So what can we do to help our presenters, the ones that aren't comfortable with this? What can we do to help them overcome their fear? Yeah. Ask them to ask a question every 5 minutes. Mm-hmm. What can we do to help the people that we work with get better at this as well? Get them to practice. How do you manage someone who hijacks a session with heaps of talk? You know, Cal, I can't say that happens very often. I think that, for example, in this presentation, if Cal, if you were the one who kept answering all the questions, then I would say, I would ask Joanna, I would say, well, what do you think about this, Joanna? And I would ask someone else to answer and give you a break. And maybe you would take the hint from that. Dominique says she butt in and tell them there's a question. Yes. Look at the other social media options. Yes, if possible, post photos of the speakers before the webinars, if not using video. That's a great idea. And even the speakers could do a little introductory video on their own. And I've done that with YouTube with my phone and done a little selfie video and said, "Hi, I'm Jennifer." And that's something they could watch beforehand as well. Do I deliberately choose a room to present from? No. And I honestly, I'm in an office in my home, and I think the dog has come in behind me, and I think my husband even came in behind me a little while ago, and I'm ignoring them. So hopefully you either haven't seen them or it hasn't been too distracting. Have you seen them? Okay, good. I'm just ignoring them. And so maybe it's, yes, setting up somewhere as much as you can where you won't be distracted and ignoring them. The other thing that we run into with our presenters sometimes is they need good connections. If they're on a crummy connection, then it can be very distracting for the participants. And so when we can, we ask them to plug into a wire. That's not always possible. But yes, I've tried to keep you too busy chatting so that you didn't notice the puppy wandering in and out of the room. And hopefully you didn't have time to check email either. So those are some of the secrets to really good webinars. I've put my WordPress blog down at the bottom of this page. And on that blog, I put a lot of different tools that I find, a lot of different tricks that I find about how we extend extension. And that's what I think we use technology to do, is extend the reach of extension education to people that may or may not find us otherwise. What else can I answer for you, or what else would you like to share as we wrap up our time together? Well, that's awesome. The first webinar ever where you haven't checked your email.
Hi, Jen. It's Dominique.
Yes.
When I run my webinars, I use them for two purposes, so that I record them and use them as a YouTube video for people to go back and get information. So
yes.
So we tend to put, because of the bandwidth issue, that I do the summary at the beginning of the webinar, and then we go into more details for our agronomists and farmers, so that they can get the information they need in the first minute or two. But if they want more details, they can continue to watch the rest of it as a YouTube video.
That's very nice.
Do you think it would still be successful if we made it more like this chat conversation type one rather than fairly formal?
You have to, I would try it with your clientele. It really depends on them. It would be very interesting to try it once, and then you would know. But yeah. I think so. I think for most people, it's a lot more valuable, because people do have specialized questions that they want answered, and they want to contribute to the conversation. Unless they're people who would be out in the field with their headphones and they're paying attention almost like a radio program. And those people wouldn't necessarily want to be engaged.
Okay. Thank you.
Sure. Good question. Natalie's asking recommended webinar platforms. So what we've been using today is Zoom. And Zoom is only free up until, I believe that you can have about 30-minute time slots for free. And other than that, it's a paid platform, but I don't think it's very expensive. eExtension has a membership to it, a license to it, which is why I can use it. We also use Adobe Connect, which is very nice. We've used Google Hangout some, but I believe that there are some restrictions as far as the number of people that you can have participate. So those are a few that we've used recently. What about you? Are there platforms that the rest of the people that are participating today that y'all have used? Oh, and Joanna has a really good idea. Insert a slide with the question asked when audio quality is bad so that the recording still includes the question. Oh, GoToMeeting, absolutely. Yeah, that works really well. The other benefit to reading the questions in the chat out loud is so that that audio is contained within the recording as well. Sometimes the chat doesn't get included in the recording, just depending on the platform. GoToWebinar. I don't know, Kel, I'm not familiar with that DED-JTR or Redback. I'm not familiar with. Perhaps those are more local. I see. Wonderful. Well, hopefully this has given you some things to consider, some things to, as we've looked at what works and what doesn't work, and some ideas to try. If nothing else, you have some key takeaways, some things that you'll walk away with, and I have enjoyed our time together. Hopefully you have as well. And I would love to hear about how you're doing. Perhaps we can do this again in a little while, and you can share your successes with me at that time.